Okay, so we're going to talk about transport in animals. So first of all, why are transport systems needed in animals? Well, the first one is the idea of supply. So being able to supply the organisms with things like oxygen and nutrients. Then also, as well as this, we're going to need to be able to, an organism is going to be able to need to remove waste products. Okay, so if we have a think about the factors that might influence the need for a transport system in an organism. Well, first of all, if we had just say, for example, a single cellular organism, like a bacteria cell, and we had oxygen that was outside the cell, which needed to get inside the cell, and nutrients here, which was outside the cell, then that's going to be able to simply pass into the cell via diffusion. And the ability of the cell to be able to take in a plentiful supply from the environment just based on the fusion alone will be sufficient to keep this organism functioning. So one of the impacts that decides, one of the influencing factors that decides whether an organism needs a transport system is its size. So let's say, for example, if I have an organism here which is multicellular, then I might have a situation where I cannot rely simply on the diffusion of substances from outside the cell, as although that would work for the cells that are on the peripheral part of the organism, these cells here in the middle are going to be insufficiently supplied with stuff such as oxygen and nutrients. So I'm going to need a method of transporting that to the cells inside this multicellular organism. So size is going to be of importance. As well as this, also it is not just size, because I could have, say for instance, a really large organism, like, I don't know, say for example, a worm. And let's just imagine I'm just drawing a very crude diagram of a worm here, which you could say was quite a large organism in terms of its size, but this would not necessarily require a transport system, as the surface area here to the volume ratio is pretty large. So there are lots of places where diffusion can occur, despite the organism being of reasonable size. It has a large surface area to volume ratio. So that's our second factor. So surface area to volume ratio. And if we have a large surface area to volume ratio of an organism, there's going to be less requirement for the need for a transport system. Okay, and then finally, the third factor that influences our need for a transport system is the amount of, say for example, oxygen and nutrients that we required. So let's say, for example, I have an organism that has a high metabolic rate, which means that they're going to require a large amount of energy, and that energy is going to come from the process of respiration, and respiration requires oxygen as well as glucose to release that energy, as well as also producing waste products such as carbon dioxide and water. So very simply, if, say for example, my metabolic requirement is 1 unit of energy, although it's not as simple as this, that would perhaps require 1 unit of oxygen, 1 unit of glucose to create that 1 unit of, release that 1 unit of energy. Whereas if my requirement of energy in the organism is 20 units, then that's going to require 20 units of oxygen, 20 units of glucose. So a larger amount of oxygen and glucose is going to be required, and it may well not be sufficient just to rely on the process of diffusion for that to occur. So I'm going to have my third factor, which is going to be metabolic rate. Okay, so what we do now is we're going to have a look at a table, and I just want you to, let me just get the table into view. I just want you to pause your video, and you're going to see if we can rank the need for effective transport system 1 to 4. So out of the situations you have here, I want you to put 1 next to the transport system. We just make a note, pause the video and just make a note of 1 next to the organism that thinks requires a transport system that needs to be most effective, and 4 next to the organism which does not require such an effective transport system, so ranking 1 to 4. So if you pause the video and have a go at that now. Okay, so hopefully you've done that. So first of all, we're looking at multicellular. So we've got 3 which are multicellular, which is obviously going to tell me that they're probably going to be the ones that are most likely going to require a transport system. Then I'm looking at surface area to volume ratio. I've got a low surface area to volume ratio on the locust and the human, and I've got a high metabolic activity for the human. So that is going to be first, followed then by second, locust, followed by the fungi, which is a multicellular organism with a reasonably high relative surface area to volume ratio, third, and then finally the bacteria fourth. And this is going to be important because the requirement or the need for an effective transport system does dictate to some respects whether an organism has a transport system, and for that matter how complex and evolved it will be. So starting with the slightly more complicated transport systems that you might find, say for example in humans, where you end up having a double circulatory system, such as, say for example, blood starting in the heart, then travelling to the lungs, and then travelling back to the heart and then to the body. So this would be a double circulatory pattern that would be required for more complicated or more complex organisms which have a high metabolic rate. Then a slightly more simplistic transport system, which you may see, say for example in fish, where you have blood being pumped to, say for example, gills, which then will then be passed to the body. And then finally you can have an even more simplistic transport circulatory system that you might see in, say for example, locusts, where you just have the heart that has an open transport system that goes to the body and then back to the heart again. So we can have different levels of complexity, and this would mainly be based on metabolic activity, particularly considering that if we had the heart pumping to the lungs and then straight to the body, then we would end up needing to have quite high pressure, blood carried under quite high pressure to the lungs, and then continuing to carry to the body, and it's very likely that the delicate capillaries in the lungs wouldn't be able to cope with that level of pressure. So what we have in the human and animal transport systems, or most animal transport systems, is a slightly reduced blood pressure as we go to the lungs to pick up oxygen, so the delicate capillaries are not damaged, and then returning back to the heart, where it will be forcefully pumped under high pressure to the body. So obviously the benefit of this is that it's faster, so there's a faster delivery of oxygen, there can be more oxygen delivered. This transport method would be slower, and this transport method at the bottom here with an open circulatory or open single circulatory system, blood is actually not held in vessels, so blood's not going to be held in vessels.